So what I want to do here is, I've got two slides that just summarize the changes. So I'm using that whole method of I will tell you what I'm about to tell you, then I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then after that I'll tell you what I just told you, so you get it 3 times. Hopefully 3 times is enough. A lot of these changes are quite complicated, and what I want to make sure I convey to you today is the main changes, just what the main changes are, and what the rationale for those changes is, and sort of how it's going to affect things in practice. There are quite a few of these changes where there's a ton of detail, and there's basically tables that no one's expecting that you'll be familiar with those tables immediately, but I've provided the tables for reference, and the tables are all in the manuals or in the code, so you can refer to those as needed. So one of the key changes is, if you were someone who was really familiar with the old code or the 2008 code, and you can quote sections, 130.1a says this, yeah. Then we changed the numbering, so you won't be able to refer to those other sections anymore. But we changed the numbering in a very predictable way. So we changed the heading numbers to make ourselves more space. So what used to be 131a is now 130.1a. We just kind of pushed an extra 0 in there. And the other main change to the organization of the code is that if you're familiar with section 119 is a section that contains all the detailed requirements for lighting control devices. Like if you have an occupancy sensor, the occupancy sensor has to have a commissioning setting where it goes on and off instantly instead of having a time delay, and the OCC sensor has to have a flashing light that does this and that. All those requirements for the devices themselves, those have now moved into a whole different part of the regulation. So they're now in Title 20, which are the appliance regulations. So the appliance regulations deal with like your portable luminaires and refrigerators and whatever else you regulate in the appliance world. So that those appliance standards now regulate lighting control devices, like little standalone photo sensors or dimmers or whatever. And what we've retained in Title 24 in the building code, we've retained section 110.9, which of course is the new numbering for 119. But that now deals only with systems, lighting control systems, not lighting control devices. So in terms of the other main changes, one of them is there's been a slight reduction in office and retail lighting power densities. That's not intended to be extraordinarily hard to comply with. It's just sort of drifting down in sync with more efficient sources. We've got some additional candy. So the power adjustment factors. This is a bonus you can claim for putting in advanced lighting control systems. We put in another type of power adjustment factor you can claim for a different kind of system that wasn't there before. We have made quite a few changes to the classification of luminaires. So this is one of the things we had to cope with this time around, and we probably have to continue coping with it next time around, is the way that LEDs are just fundamentally different in their construction. The way that they are put together as devices is different from the other light sources we have. So we don't, typically with a light source you've got some, you've got a power supply, sort of a ballast deal, you've got some kind of a lamp deal that attaches into a lamp holder, and the whole thing's in an enclosure. And all those parts are discrete, separate parts. With an LED, those parts are often combined together as certain unitary structures. So we've had to cope with all the different ways in which LEDs can be built and combined together with different kinds of power sources and different lamp holder configurations. So that's changed the way that we classify luminaires in the standards very slightly. Because if you think about one of the fundamental things that the standards have to do that we don't think about very much is we have to say, well, if you put this thing in the ceiling, how many watts do we say that thing consumes? And sometimes that's easy. You put a luminaire in the ceiling that's got a ballast on it, and the ballast says this consumes 31.6 watts, and that's done. But in other cases, you can have options where your luminaire has a lamp holder, and you can put different kinds of lamps in that lamp holder. Even with a fluorescent, you can put in a 32-watt lamp, you can put in a 30-watt lamp, a 28-watt lamp, sometimes a 25-watt lamp. And as regulators, sometimes we let that slide and we say, well, you know, it's in the noise. And then other times we say, actually, you could put a 71 watt incandescent in this thing, but you're claiming you're only using 6 watts of LED. Maybe we're not going to buy that. So we have to decide how we classify luminaire power. That's one of the little issues of detail that we spend a lot of time fretting over. We made, as Sean said, we made changes to the multi-level requirement. You'll be familiar with the requirement that you have to have bi-level switching. You've had to have bi-level switching in California for however many years now, 10 or 15 years. That has now evolved along to its next stage, which is multi-level dimming, multi-level control. And in practice, that's going to be dimming in most cases. We've now got also a new type of occupancy sensor control. It's a whole different kind of approach, which instead of turning the lights off completely, it switches the lights either partially on or partially off in an attempt to save energy. And those are either mandatory or voluntary. But there's more. Thought we'd be over already, but no. One of the big changes this time, this is really conceptually a huge change, is how the code handles emergency and egress lighting. And that has been, it's an interesting area because the fire code, what the fire code says is actually not what most buildings actually do. And so we looked at this in detail and we said, what does the fire code actually need us to do? And what can we do working within those parameters to save energy? And we've come up with a new way of handling that. We've also got photo controls, daylight linked controls that used to be mandatory only in very big spaces, like spaces that were 2,500 square feet of continuous primary daylit zone. And there are not very many of those. This time around, we made lighting control, photo controls mandatory in much smaller spaces. You'll see a lot more photo controls in offices and schools and retail. We've also got demand response. Used to be mandatory. I think it was only in retail buildings larger than 15,000 or 50,000 square feet. Now it's all commercial buildings greater than 10,000. So that's going to become a pretty common fact of life, is some kind of demand response capability in the lighting controls that you install. We also made the code extend to more retrofits. So there was kind of a grey area about a lot of retrofit projects. We tried to clear that up by making the code tighter, essentially. We've reduced the lighting power density for outdoor, not very much, but enough that I want to tell you about it, because it's important. And we changed the system, or we harmonized with the Illuminating Engineering Society in how we categorize glare from outdoor luminaires, because there used to be some kind of California-specific requirements, and we decided it was easier for everyone if we just harmonized with the rest of the country on that and made our glare requirements have the same system. For sticking with outdoor, we've also now got mandatory photo controls and time controls for outdoor luminaires, not one or the other, but both. And this is another kind of conceptual change, is for all outdoor luminaires that are mounted at 24 feet or less, we require some kind of motion control that will partially shut that luminaire off if it detects that there's nobody around it. So you'll have the kind of outdoor lighting they have over at UC Davis, where at night it goes down to half, unless it detects somebody walking around or driving around, in which case it bumps up to full. So that's the whistle-stop tour. And as you can see, that's quite a lot of stuff. We're going to delve into a little bit more detail on each one of those things so you can get a good understanding of what exactly is required. We have the luxury of time this morning. We're not too rushed. So I can absolutely take questions as we go along. Just stick up a hand and we'll clarify things or take comments or whatever. Anything to start with before I kick off?